All right, just double check your answers here. For example, 2, in case you weren't quite done, or I know towards the end you were just sitting there waiting, so I just wanted to get to the point where you could check. So make sure the set builder, the interval notation, the graph. Make sure on your number line that you don't have anything less than 4 also shaded. It would just be in between. Any questions before we move ahead? All right. Then inequalities that are joined by or. So an inequality that is joined by or, this is true as long as one or more of the inequalities is true. So your solutions do not have to be a solution to both. They just have to be a solution to one of the 2 inequalities. And the graph is called the union of the solution set. So it's just basically you're taking the 2 inequalities and you're putting them on the same number line for their graph. It's not looking at where they share values. Sometimes they share values, sometimes they don't. It doesn't matter if it's joined by or, you just shade both inequalities on the same graph. So just to show you that, I have 2 inequalities listed here separately, and then if they were joined in a compound inequality by or, what that number line graph would look like. So I'll just go through this quickly up here. If we were to graph x is greater than or equal to 2, we'd have a dot on 2 shaded to the right, everything greater than 2. And then for x is less than -1, we'd have a circle on -1, open circle, and then everything shaded less than that to the left. So notice these 2 don't ever overlap. So if these were joined by and, it would be a no solution because they don't overlap. But because it's joined by or, there is a solution, and it's just these 2 graphs put on the same number line. So you'd have an open circle at -1 shaded left, closed dot at 2 shaded to the right. I would say a majority of the time, if the inequality is joined by or, the graph has shading in the opposite direction, but not always. They could be shaded the same direction, so they might overlap. That way they could be shaded opposite directions but toward each other, so they overlap. So graphs for compound inequalities with or can look different. And then I have here the in interval notation, because we'll write this in interval notation. The symbol for the union of 2 sets is, it looks like a capital U. This basically represents the word or. So only use that union symbol, though, if you're writing the interval notation with the parentheses and the brackets. So if we were to write our compound inequality here in interval notation, now because we have 2 parts to the graph, we're going to have 2 separate intervals, and then they're joined together by this union symbol. So if we look at this leftmost interval, this interval has an endpoint at -1, and everything is shaded below it all the way down to -infinity. So this would have the interval, I'll write it above here, -infinity up to -1. -infinity gets a parenthesis always. -1 is a open circle. It's not included. It also gets a parenthesis. So that would be the interval just for this half of the graph. And then for the upper half, so this one starts at 2 and is shaded all the way up towards +infinity. So I have 2 up to +infinity. Infinity, again, always gets a parenthesis. The 2, because the dot on the graph, it is included, gets a bracket. So the interval notation then is these 2 put together by the union symbol. So it's parenthesis, -infinity, comma, -1, parenthesis, union symbol, bracket, 2, comma, +infinity, parenthesis. So the two separate intervals would have been like you practiced on Friday. Now it's just putting two together in the same problem. And that's because you see the two separate areas of the graph that are shaded. Whereas in the previous examples, there was just one range of values that was shaded together. So we're going to look at example 3. I also want to point out, though, before we get to example 3, compound inequalities joined by or will always be written as two separate inequalities with or in the middle. So the notation we had on the front, this combined notation of just having everything together, no words in the middle, and like examples 1 and 2, how those looked, those specifically mean the two inequalities are joined by and. You cannot write an inequality joined by or in this form. So just make sure when you get an answer, if it is joined by or, it has to stay separate, joined by or. You can't just combine it or it's wrong. So looking at example 3. So if we're going to solve this compound inequality, because they're written separately and they have to stay separate, you just solve each inequality separately. So if I look at the first one, g minus 6 is greater than negative 11. I would add 6 to each side to solve for g. So then g is greater than negative 11 plus 6 is negative 5. So that's half of my answer. Now I solve the other inequality for g. 2g plus 4 is less than negative 15. So subtract 4 first. So 2g is less than negative 19. And then divide by 2. So g is less than, I could leave this as an improper fraction, or it is negative 9.5. So I can write the decimal. It is terminating. So here's what I don't want you to do, or rather, it's not even that I don't want you to do it, it's wrong if you do it. Don't just circle both of these and say these are my two answers. You should only have one answer. And this is how you should write it. These two joined together by the word or. So in set builder notation, I would make a brace, G, a line for such that, and then I write both inequalities joined by or. So G is greater than negative 5, or G is less than negative 9.5. And then close the braces. The only thing you could do differently and have it still be correct is if you wrote G is less than negative 9.5 first and G is greater than negative 5 second. So if you just switch the order they're in, that's also fine. So this is the set builder notation for the answer. So now if I'm graphing this on a number line, now here make sure because of the order I wrote them in, negative 5 is actually bigger than negative 9.5. So on the number line, negative 9.5 should be first, and then negative 5. But I graph both of these inequalities just together on the same number line. So if I'm graphing G is greater than negative 5, I'd have an open circle on negative 5, shaded to the right. If I'm graphing G is less than negative 9.5, I'd have an open circle on negative 9.5, shaded to the left. And that would be the graph. The interval notation then, if I start with my leftmost interval, so this is being shaded all the way down towards negative infinity. So I'd have one interval is negative infinity up to negative 9.5. Parenthesis on the negative infinity side. Negative 9.5 is an open circle, not included, also gets a parenthesis. Make the union symbol. And then the uppermost interval starts at negative 5, is shaded all the way up towards positive infinity. So negative 5, comma, positive infinity, both sides for this one also get parentheses. Negative 5 is not included, and infinity always gets a parenthesis. So this is the interval notation for that solution set.